Anthony from mycodeteacher.com, and in this lesson I'm going to show you how to archive and unarchive data for your iPhone application. So when you begin building iPhone applications, you realize that one thing that many applications share is the fact that they need some way so that when the application quits, it saves the basically the last state it was in, and so that when it reopens, it looks the same as when it quit. So when a user modifies some data or adds or deletes some data, those changes are saved, and when the application is opened again, whatever changes the user last made to the data in the application are saved and kept intact. So let's get started. So I've got Xcode open here. We're going to create a new project, of course. We're going to choose window-based, and we will title it Archiving. So we have the Xcode project window open here. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to add onto the main window a table view that will list some rows based on how many times the user presses a plus button. So on the top of the application will be a navigation bar, and on the right of that navigation bar will be a plus button, and pressing the plus button will add a row to the table view. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that when the application quits, it saves the number of rows in that table view, and when it reopens, it basically opens the file saved and reads from that how many rows to put in the table view. So when the application is reopened, it'll look exactly as it did when it was last opened and when it quit. So let's open mainwindow.zib here and set up our interface. So let's drag this to a different spaces screen here to avoid cluttering. So we've got here the instance window, and we have the default UI window instance. So we'll double click that, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to create our interface for the application. So first let's add a navigation bar on the top so we can add in that plus button. We'll give it the title Archiving. And here in the library on the right here is a UI bar button item, and we're going to drag this to the right of the navigation bar. And in the Attributes Inspector panel, if you don't have that open, you can go to Tools, Attributes Inspector. We can change the identifier drop down here. These are basically presets for different common types of bar button items. We could choose the Add preset, and that'll give us the plus button we're looking for. So instead of creating our own plus button, we can just use the one Apple already has here for us. Now we're going to save this, and what we need to do is we need to go back to Xcode and create the interface builder action that we're going to connect the plus button to. So of course we need to make the return type IB action so that when interface builder reads through this file, it knows to list this as a possible action for connections for the archiving app delegate instance. We'll give the title Add Row to Table View, and we will save this. And now we can go back to interface builder, and we can right click and drag from this plus button here to the archiving app delegate instance and connect it to the add row to table view action. So again, when this plus button is pressed, it will send a message to the archiving app delegate instance here and tell it to execute the add row to table view method. Now we're going to add the table view underneath the navigation bar here in our window for listing the number of rows the user has created. Now we need to connect the data source outlet of this table view to the app delegate instance so that the table view asks the app delegate for what data to display. So right click and drag from the table view to the archiving app delegate instance and connect the data source outlet. So now our interface builder file is set up. So now we just need to work on the code here to make this all work. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an instance variable here in the archiving app delegate class to store all the rows or the table view data, the number of the rows in the table view. So we're going to make an NS immutable array instance variable, and we will call it simply data. This is going to store an array of strings, of NS string instances, and those will be outputted to the table view. So actually, let's save this here. And now let's go to the .m file. So first, what we'll do is we'll implement the add row to table view method. So IB action, again, if you don't remember, IB action here it means void. It's just for Interface Builder to know what actions to list for a particular object. So IB action add row to table view. And this is going to be pretty simple here. Data, the data array, add object, a row. So we're just going to add a string here that says a row. So you could probably tell already that every row in the table view is going to read a row. They're all going to look the same. The point here is really how many rows there are. Now, we actually need to here, of course, initialize the data array so that we can add objects to it. Otherwise, we will be adding objects to a nil array or non-existing object. So the data equals ns mutable array alloc init. So here we've allocated memory for and initialized an ns mutable array instance, and now data basically points to an initialized mutable array. Now we can add objects to it. Now what we need to do is implement all the data source methods for our table view so that the table view can draw itself. Remember, it's going to call to the archiving app delegate object. So there's three we need to implement. The first returns an ns integer, and it is number of sections in table view. We're going to make this a simple table view with just one section. So we're just going to return a constant 1. The next two methods we're not going to fill out yet. We're just going to fill out the headers. So table view, number of rows in section, ns integer section. Again, we're not going to implement this just yet. And the last of the data source methods, UI table view cell. Of course, this here table view cell for row index path. Here we return a UI table view cell instance for each row in the table view, depending on how we want it to look. Cell for row at index path, ns index path, index path. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to actually set up the archiving and unarchiving environment. So first thing we need to do is we need to figure out where we're going to save this data. In what directory on the iPhone are we going to save this application data so that when we open the application we can look for it somewhere. We're going to be saving to a plist file because Cocoa Touch objects archive to plist files very nicely, exactly the way you want them to, and it makes this whole process much simpler. So first what we're going to do is we're going to write out a method that when we call to it, it will return a path that we can save the application data to. So NSString, of course we want this path is going to be in an NSString instance, data file path, NSString data file path. This is going to be the string that we return. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to use a function to figure out where to save this file to. So as it turns out, each application on an iPhone has a documents directory, and we're going to save it in there. So Safari has a documents directory, the music application has a documents directory, and so this makes it very simple and avoids interference with other applications. So basically it's going to save in its own documents directory, and we can very simply get the path to that documents directory using a function Apple has created solely for this purpose, nssearch path for directories in domains. Now there are three parameters here. we're going to look at this in the documentation so you can see really what's going on here. So ns search, here it is, search path for directories and domain. So it says here under discussion, creates a list of path strings for specified directories in the specified domains. And again, there are 3 parameters. The first here is the path directory. So if we click this, we see the available options. The one we're going to go with is the ns document directory. This will get us a path for the documents directory for that specific application. Then we have your ns search path domain mask. Here we're going to go with the ns user domain mask. So basically for that individual iPhone. So what we have here is a directory, a document directory for an individual application for each individual user, for that user's iPhone. And the last here is just a Boolean expand tilde. So what that does is it expands the tilde character so that it fully gives us the whole path to the directory. So what we're going to plug in here is ns document directory, ns user domain mask, and yes. So if what we just talked about here with this function didn't make much sense to you, don't worry too much about it, because you can use this. Is none of this ever has to change. You can use this for all your applications, and it's probably the best way to do this. Best place to save application data is in the documents directory for each individual iPhone for each application. So you can use this for every application and it'll get the job done perfectly. And now we need to actually get that path that we just searched for. Documents directory equals paths object. So we're going to assume that as it is, this path, since this is an array here of strings of possible paths, we're going to go with the one at the first or the first object in the array. That is going to be the one we want to save to. Now we need to append the file name. So we have the directory, now we need to add on to that the file name. So data file path is going to be the string we return, documents directory string by appending path component. And you can put in here whatever you want. This is just going to be the name of the file. So we're just going to put application data.plist. And then we're going to retain it, and we're going to return the data file path. So now here we can call to this method to get the path of the file that we want to save the data to and unarchive the data from. Now what we need to do is write a save data method that we can call to save the data in the data array to this file that whose path we have just created a method to get. So let's do that here. So void is no return value here. Save data. This is probably going to be much simpler than you ever could have imagined. ns keyed archiver archive root object data copy. We're going to make a copy of the data array. So we're going to take an ns mutable array, make a copy, and it's going to be an ns array instance. To file self data file path. And that's our save data method. So we have a class here written by Apple, of course, ns keyed archiver, and it has a class method archive root object to file. So we plug in the object, the root object we want to archive, and the file or the path that we want to archive it to. And so it basically copies or writes to that file exactly as that object looked at the time you archived it. So if we had an array with 5 strings, it will archive an array with 5 strings, and when we reopen it and we call to another method in which we unarchive that data, it'll return an array, or basically a copy of that array with 5 NS string instances. So exactly as the object looked when you archived it is how it'll look when you unarchive it. You can see already how very easy this is to do and how great of a job Apple has done to make archiving and unarchiving data for your iPhone application very simple for you. Now what we want to do is, when the application first launched, we're going to unarchive that object. So first, ns array, archived array equals ns keyed unarchiver, unarchive object file, self data file path. So we're going to check to see if the user has actually saved any data yet. So if this is the first time the user saved data, or if the data for some reason never got written or corrupted or something, we're going to check. So if archived array equals nil, we're going to create a new NS mutable array instance. Else, data equals NS mutable array alloc init with array archived array. So first we unarchive the object at this file path, and we check to see if the archived array, or the array that we got from unarchiving, was nil. If it's nil, we create an array. If it's not nil, we create an NS mutable array instance from the archived array. So either way, we have an array here to work with, an NS mutable array instance to work with. So now what we need to do is fill out those other two table view data source methods that we left blank or unimplemented earlier. So the first one here, the number of rows in sections. So how many rows are we going, or do we want this table view to draw out? So of course we want the number of rows in table view to be the same as the number of objects in the data array. So we're going to return the count of this array. So data count, we're going to send the count method to this data array, this NS mutable array instance, and however many NS string objects are in that array is how many rows we want the table view to have. And then we need to implement the table view self row index path method here. So when I implement this method, I'm going to assume that you've already watched the table view list data video. So I'm going to assume that this is basically routine for you. If not, you should watch that right now and then come back to this. Otherwise, this is probably going to confuse you. So first, we're going to try to grab the cell, a reusable cell, or an already used cell, using the dequeue reusable cell with identifier method. We're going to use the identifier cell. We're going to check now to see if a cell with that identifier has not yet been used by the table view. If it hasn't, we're going to create a new cell. So cell equals, if cell equals nil, UI table view cell alloc init with style, UI table view cell style default. Of course, that's a cell with one large black text label in the middle. Reuse identifier cell, of course, and we're going to tell this cell to auto release. Now we're going to set the text label of the cell's text to the object at the index path.row. So, of course, we have a data array that stores a bunch of NS string instances, and we're going to pass in the index path.row, so that's going to be the row the table view is currently trying to draw. We're going to pass that into the object at index method, calling it to the data array, and whatever index we're at is going to be returned, and that's the NS string we want to draw. Now, of course, all of these strings are going to read the same. They're all going to say a row, because that's what that's how the add row to table view method is implemented. But this is good practice. This is the way you'll end up doing it with real applications, so you might as well practice it now. And of course, we're going to return the cell. So we're almost done here. There's two things we need to do. The first is we need to modify the add row table view method here, so that after adding a row, the table view redraws itself. But we haven't actually created an interface builder outlet and connected it to that table view. So let's do that now. IB outlet UI table view Actually, we'll call it main table view so as not to conflict with the data source methods. Remember to save that, and now we'll go to interface builder and right click and drag from the archiving app delegate object to the table view on the window here and connect the main table view outlet. Now we can save this, go back to Xcode, and modify this method here and tell the table view to reload itself after we add a row here. Reload data. Let's So basically it will refresh itself after we've added a new object, and then it will list that object. And the last thing we need to do is we need to save the data after adding an object. So self save data. And now our application is complete. When we build, we'll get 2 warnings here, but they're simply warnings telling us that the archiving app delegate object may not respond to the save data method and the data file path method, simply because we haven't listed those in the .h file. That's not really of concern, so we'll build the application anyway. So now, if we click the plus button, a row is added. We can do this as many times as we want. And now, if we quit the application and build it again, we have here the same amount of rows as we did when the application was last open. So you can see that archiving an object, in this case an NSArray instance, is actually very simple. All we have to do is use the search path for directories and domains method or function here to get the document directory. Then we get the file path, we create a file path, save to a plist, tell the NSKeyedArchiver class to archive the data array to that file path, and then simply check and see if an array has been archived when we open the application, and we can save whatever data we'd like here. So that concludes this lesson. I'm Anthony from mycodeteacher.com. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you tune into future lessons. Thanks for watching.